The legislature is back in session. Vice Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. When we took a break, I was preparing an amendment to send the additional $9 million this year and the additional percentage in future years to the Guam Memorial Hospital, as was discussed earlier but not put in writing. However, in discussions with the author of the original amendment, it seems that there's another intention for these proceeds, so I'm going to yield to the author of the amendment to further discuss that, Madam Chair. Thank you. So I would withdraw my amendment.
We'll take a brief recess. The legislature is back in session. Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make it so noted that the funds that are generated through the increase from this revenue enhancement would be used to replace the funds that go into, I think the speaker already stated that, it will replace the money that's going to the agencies that are supported by the Healthy Future Funds, and that overall, the funds will actually reduce the amount of SAR funds that we would need. Okay, I just want to make sure that that was very clear. If we want to identify where the funds are at on the Healthy Future Funds, we'd have to ask Ricky to put that numbers together, and it'll show where it's at. Okay, Vice Speaker? What?
Thank you, Senator. Senator San Nicolas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In light of that new information, it raises further concerns for me. If we're going to be raising a tax, I would like for the people of Guam to be getting more services as a result of that tax going up. If we're going to raise this tax in order to reprogram that money to reduce the SAR figure that we adopted at 20 million, which was originally at 18 million, I'm just concerned that we're raising taxes on the people of Guam, and that money is just going to fill a hole that we're trying to fill with collections instead. The Healthy Futures Fund is a very unique fund in that its resources are intended to address health issues on the island. And so if we're going to be increasing the tobacco tax, that money should be going to specifically address tobacco-related issues, smoking cessation, treating of cancer. If we're going to be raising the tobacco tax just to lower the SAR number, we're taking resources away from fighting cancer in order to alleviate the requirement to collect taxes. I'm not comfortable with that. If we're going to increase the tobacco tax and provide more resources for fighting cancer, then that makes sense to me. But if we're just doing this to reduce the SAR appropriation that we already all agreed to, I would like for us to pause and reconsider that. Because whenever we raise taxes, we're taking away an opportunity to provide more services to our people. And with this particular tax, cancer especially, I would prefer that every additional dollar we generate in taxation goes for that specific purpose. We have so many of our people who are in need of services. And if we're going to raise this tax to instead reduce the SAR balances so that there is less need to collect taxes, that's not what the point of this tax is for, nor is it the point of this fund. I would proffer we keep the SAR figures where they are. It's at roughly 25% of the amounts that are already very clearly out there. And these increases on the tobacco side, they go to addressing tobacco issues. They go to fighting cancer. They go to smoking cessation. That's the whole point of the tax. That's the whole point of the fund. I was also, and we've done this earlier too, with respect to the property tax. You know, Simon Sanchez isn't being funded. That property tax increase can be a funding source to rebuild Simon Sanchez. But instead, we're adding that back to the SAR fund already. Every tax increase that we make and add back to the SAR fund is a lost opportunity for our people in order to try and relieve the need to collect taxes, which I think is a pretty common theme in this community about what our public expects. It's a common theme about what the incoming leadership thinks they should do. They definitely don't think we should increase taxes to fund the government. They think we should go out and collect for that. So in light of that new information, I don't want this tax increase to go to that purpose. We should instead keep the monies focused for the purposes intended, which is to fight cancer and to address smoking cessation. And I would need to object to the amendment if the funds aren't going to be used specifically for that purpose, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Nicolas. Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, this morning I met with the Department of Revenue and Tax folks. As we talk about the SAR, even though I supported the intent and how we were going to use the SAR, as I met with them, and then, you know, there is an oversight on Thursday that we'll be discussing about the collectibles. We need to understand that as we talk about the collectibles, the 73 million is inclusive of interest and penalties. And for most folks that know how taxes are collected, at any given time, as even Mr. Camacho identified, that there's like $57 million that's non-collectible. At any given time, from here forward on the 73 million, there could be one taxpayer come in. If he files bankruptcy or he passes away, that amount of money that's supposed to be collectible is gone. So I would, if any of my colleagues have any questions they want to pose to the Department of Revenue and Tax for Thursday, please send it to me so that when we do have the oversight, the questions you may want to ask, they're able to answer it and not say, I'll get back to you, because the get back to you is almost, it's like a dream. You'd hope they call you and they let you know, but we can get the answers Thursday. Because number one, the SAR issue of 73 million, it's great if they could collect 20 million in 2019. But if they don't, what are we saying? Let's close the Department of Revenue and Taxation because there's no money and they're the agency that collects all the money for the GovGuam. Let's close the Department of Administration because there's not enough money from the SAR because they can't issue the checks, they can't pay and hire folks. And we can keep going on to include the governor's office, to include even the Guam Legislature that's going to be underfunded. I just ask that the amendment I presented, which is there will be additional amendments introduced to taxes is not the direction I want to go, but that's sometimes maybe the hardest choice I have to make. Unless somebody can come up with a means to trim the government, to right-size the government, or to do whatever they believe they can do, present it. SAR is not the only other route. There is another route, and that's raising taxes. And that's something I know most of you are not in agreement with. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. There's been an objection. Speaker Cruz, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I think it's unfortunate. I support the increase in the cigarette tax. I think it's unfortunate that it's tied in this whole issue of increasing revenue. When I first increased the tobacco taxes 10 years ago, it was for public policy for the purpose of dissuading people from smoking. Because I was tired of flying to the States to visit family, getting off the plane and seeing people get onto the van for the LA medical referral office with their oxygen tank, stand outside the arrival area and have a cigarette holding onto their tank before they get into the car on their way to Good Sam for medical treatment for the various sources that they have. I'm not sure if it was Providence, but I just sent all of you an email on an article that just came into my inbox this afternoon. And I wasn't joking this morning when I said sometimes I'm getting really paranoid about whether or not it's the messenger and not the message. It really is imperative that we as a community establish a public policy in favor of deterring cigarette smoking. The article points out the number of people that die annually. Annually in the United States, 480,000 people die from cigarette-related smoking diseases. And it's broken down in the article on what specific lung cancer, cardiovascular, and one other disease. But I really beg all of you, before we vote, to take the time to read it. I forwarded it all to you on WhatsApp. And it really explains, not for those of you that are concerned about the lower income, it talks about the income discrepancy. And it talks about the discrepancy about the fact that higher income people have higher life expectancy, a longer life expectancy than the lower income. And it attributes some of that to cigarette smoking. And it's, again, I keep being paranoid that people are going, you have a JD, not an MD, shut up. This article that I forwarded to all of you was from a study from the Journal of the American Medical Association. I ask all of you to please read it. The increase in the cigarette tax should be a public policy vote that we take today. The fact that it generates additional revenue is great, because the cost to the community from smoke-related diseases that we have to pick up in the end is great. But the thing is that there really has to be a concerted effort on the part of this body. And though I want this to go through, the increase of cigarette tax is not the way that I wanted to end my career here in the legislature. I wanted the last bill that I introduced here to be moving tobacco into the Schedule I controlled substance. Because anything that kills that many people annually should be a Schedule I controlled substance. But I know I can't get that kind of support. And looking at you, Madam Chair, as the head of the Democratic Party of Guam, I don't mind admitting that the first thing I do every morning is I delete every single email that I get from the DNC, DCCC, and all the National Democratic Party because of my complete disgust with the fact that they refuse to address cigarettes as a party, as a public policy, because of the loss of votes. It's imperative that we as a community do what we can to try to address cigarette smoking and try to deter and discourage the young people from starting to smoke, and for those that are smoking to find help for cessation. But really seriously, it's imperative that this be passed as a public policy. The fact that it generates revenue is gravy. But I ask all of you, please read the article, because I know if I was to be the one that exposited all those statements from my position here, you wouldn't believe it. But please read the article, because it very clearly explains why it's imperative that this be done, and this be done now. And it can't wait. I support the thought of trying to find out how much we're losing, but we're losing people every day. What goes into the coffer is of secondary consequence to me. My first concern is the number of people going into coffins because of it. That's why I'd like to see it implemented as soon as possible, so that if you read the article, it talks about the fact that in 1990, the smoking rate in the United States was 25%. It's gone down to 13%. Guam is still at 27%. We're still higher than the national average was 20 years ago. We have to do something, because too many of our people are being lost to these diseases, and we can figure out some way to get some of the other numbers that we need, but we've got to do something. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Speaker Cruz. Senator Morrison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Chair, yesterday I didn't support the SAR fund because I believe it wasn't a viable source of funding to support certain agencies. However, that amendment passed, and I believe a majority of our colleagues felt that was the process to take to balance the budget. My understanding, Madam Chair, is the budget was balanced yesterday as a result of that amendment passing. So although I respect the mover of the amendment and looking for a viable source of funding, I am not sure how or why we're proceeding in this direction, understanding the budget was already balanced yesterday. It was clear to me we were going to proceed going forward, and I'm not sure if the body's maybe second-guessing their decision with the SAR fund, that we are looking to other revenue-enhancing measures, but Again, I thought that whole process yesterday was really to balance the budget, and that's what, I didn't support it, but a majority of members supported it. And I'm not sure why we're still looking for revenue enhancements.
Thank you, Senator. There's been an objection to the San Augustine amendment. Any other member wish to be heard? Vice Speaker Terlahi, and then I'll, Senator Esteves.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm trying to figure out, and I guess I want to state my objection that it's not clear. I would ask that the sponsor make it very clear what he means by putting, this is Healthy Futures money, unless we say something else, but it's going to go into the Healthy Futures Fund automatically. And we haven't appropriated in this bill, so is it intended that the GMH, for example, Healthy Futures amount of $4,700,000 is going to be increased, or is it, are we replacing the general fund? Is he proposing to replace the general fund amount that's being appropriated to GMH with Healthy Futures money? That's $5.9 million. Or are we giving GMH more money? I guess he's saying OOB is going to rewrite this, but I guess I'm asking what the exact mechanism is going to be. Thank you, Madam Chair. If that could be clarified before we vote, because it's not clear. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I can just clarify, you know, again, I'm not sure if my statements were made. Testing. But I really want to point out and stress, you know, if majority of the members who supported the SAR fund yesterday are second guessing that decision, they got to make that clear, because it seems like we're still proceeding with revenue enhancements.
We're still in Section 2, Senator.
Okay, but I still need to understand the direction of where the body is going with revenue enhancements, because that was the whole exercise yesterday, to address the shortfall, which majority of this body agreed to, which was the SAR fund. So if this body is second guessing their decision yesterday that we're proceeding with more revenue enhancements, we need to know that, because that wasn't my understanding yesterday proceeding with the budget today. Their SAR fund yesterday that a majority of the members which voted for it, which I didn't support, agreed that was to balance the budget. So I'm not sure why we're still proceeding with revenue enhancements.
Thank you, Senator Morrison. Speaker Cruz, and then Senator Esteves.
To the question that was raised as to how this Healthy Futures Fund is going to be used, Healthy Futures Fund is a special fund with statutorily mandated directions or recipients of the Healthy Futures Fund. So any increase in the Healthy Futures Fund would be able to increase the appropriations of those agencies who are still receiving general fund revenue on top of Healthy Futures, because Healthy Futures isn't sufficient. And as I said earlier, I'm hoping that those of you in the 35th, once it's proven that Healthy Futures is going to be able to provide $50 or $60 million a year because of this increase and the filling of the gap that has been shown recently, that it'll be the single source of dedicated revenue for GMH. But right now, we don't know how much it's going to be, and we've got to be able to move some of that money once, if it goes through and it is available in the Healthy Futures Fund. We can start reducing the appropriations in those agencies that receive Healthy Futures funds plus general fund, and replace it so that it can be used elsewhere.
Thank you, Speaker Cruz. Vice Speaker, does that satisfy your question?
So does that mean then, so for the GMH $5.9 million general fund appropriation, that will be replaced with Healthy Futures money if we adopt this amendment? That's what adoption of this amendment means?
It depends on what, there's a formula. So the I think it gets like.
72% of the Healthy Futures Fund is subject to appropriation, so it's going to be 72% of the 9 million is still subject, the 9 million additional is still subject to appropriation, so that's my question. Are we going to give it, in addition to GMH, or are you saying we're replacing it sounds like you're saying we're going to replace this general fund amount that we're giving to GMH with the 5?
If it passes, which I hope it does, then we will have to rework those areas that can be recipients of Healthy Futures Fund, because I don't want to be accused of using Healthy Futures Fund in Department of Land Management or parks. But if I can reduce the amount in Healthy Futures Fund, increase the Healthy Futures to the hospital or GMH with this additional 8.35, then yes, that money can then be freed up to go to other areas.
Madam Chair, just a point of order. I believe that the amendment we have before us is just a proposal to increase the tax with no sunset provision. I don't believe there have been any amendments to the amendments passed. So with regards to where the money would go, I think is inconsequential until the body adopts this as revenue. And then we would have to go back with another subsequent amendment, different amendment to be voted on where that money would go to, whether it goes to a specific source. So I feel that we're getting off target, and I believe that the talks of where the money could go, I think could potentially affect the vote on whether or not this body's going to just adopt the revenue. And so my point of order is that we just stay on the amendment at hand, and it's to adopt the revenue. And whether that goes to Healthy Future initiatives in terms of policy to support tobacco cessation, substance abuse, and other initiatives outlined and allowed in the statute, I think that could be addressed separately after this.
Thank you, Senator Estevez. There's been an objection. Any other member wish to be heard on the San Augustine amendment?
Madam Chair, point of order, could you, I think he said with a sunset provision. Do you want?
No, without the sunset provision is
all
what
right.
he said. There's been an objection on the San Augustine amendment. Would any other member wish to be heard? If not, we'll call for the vote. On the San Augustine amendment?
Madam Chair, just because of all the discussion, could you be clear on the vote again before calling the question?
Yes, it's very unclear, Madam Chair, whether we're increasing amounts to GMH or we're going to do what the sponsor says and just replace the general fund amounts to GMH with Healthy Futures money after this amendment.
On the San Augustine amendment, this is an amendment to add a new section 2, 10 and 10 in chapter 1, increasing the tobacco tax. On the last page, the last subsection, effective date and sunset, is removed. So this ends with sub-item C. The last few words are size of the package to be taxed, period. And that's the end of the amendment. This is what we're discussing. So again, on the San Augustine amendment, there's been an objection. Sorry, Senator San Augustine, if you'd like to close? No, we'll call for the question. All in favor of the San Augustine amendment, please raise your hand. Amendment passes. Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, we have another one that's been passed out. That's the increase on taxes on alcohol beverages. The only thing is deleted is the effective date and sunset. Okay.
On the San Augustine amendment to add a new section 210 and 10, chapter 1, increasing the tax on alcoholic beverages. Would any member wish to be heard on this amendment? Senator San Nicolas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Similar to what we've experienced on the tobacco side of the House, we haven't introduced it yet, but we are working on trying to establish an alcohol stamp program as well. And similar to the tobacco stamp, I'm confident that if we implement an alcohol stamp, we're going to see a significant jump in revenues without having increased the taxes. If we increase the taxes before we implement a stamp, we again are going to run the risk of washing out the revenue numbers, so it will be unclear how much in tax collections is as a result of better enforcement versus how much was as a result of tax increases. Failure to have a clear delineation between the two exacerbates the challenges with going back and collecting past taxes that were either underreported or not reported at all. Again, similar to some of the issues I raised with the previous amendment, I think that this kind of an amendment is warranted if and after we've tightened the enforcement environment with a stamp program or some other program, so that we can make sure that what we're bringing in going forward is exactly what we're supposed to, and that we also are able to reconcile everything that people of Guam did not receive in the past that they should have received. So I think that this amendment, similar to the previous one, has a timing issue, and I think that we can entertain these things as standalone measures in the future. You could even entertain them, some members are talking about, well, if the SAR money doesn't come in, how are we going to do this? You can entertain it then. You can entertain these things this time next fiscal year, if in the last quarter of the fiscal year you needed to generate revenue. But to do so now would run the risk of us not being able to pass legislation and get certain enforcement mechanisms in place that could see significant money walk through the door that has been escaping taxes previously. When we passed the tobacco tax stamp bill almost in October of last year, that set so many things into motion, and it resulted in a $14.7 million liability walking through the door. And there's just a lot of other opportunities out there similar to this when we tighten the enforcement environment. But I'm just concerned that raising these figures now on the alcohol side is going to wash out the revenues in a way where you won't be able to delineate between what was as a result of higher taxes and what was as a result of better enforcement. And that will just make the prior year enforcements so much more challenging. And yeah, people, as a policy measure, whether it's for tobacco, whether it's for alcohol, if you raise the taxes, less people will smoke, less people will drink, less people will die as a result of smoking, less people will die as a result of drinking. I totally get the policy statement on that. But if you're also going to lose out on all of that, the whole point of that tax over all those years, if you're going to lose out on all the uncollected revenue, so many people would have died in vain because we let that money go. Making sure we're collecting everything, make sure that people aren't dying in vain as a result of these taxes going unenforced. I get the whole policy statement, totally. And I understand the revenue shortfall situation clearly. So let's make every dollar count that we should have gotten, and let's make every life lost. Let's make sure every life lost wasn't in vain. That's why I'm saying let's move forward with tightening the enforcement aspect and go back and collect everything. And not just rush out to jump on opportunities because we're trying to balance a budget. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator San
With that,
Nicolas.
I would need to object to the amendment at this time.
Thank you, Senator San Nicolas. Senator Morrison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, the list that was provided, the speaker, outlined certain points that, or certain revenue enhancements for this body to entertain to address specifically the shortfall of this budget. And Madam Chair, again, I'm going back to the SAR fund. Yesterday, we went through an exercise throughout the whole day to address the whole issue of that shortfall. And it's my understanding that was addressed with the SAR fund. And maybe the OFB could make that very clear. As a result of the SAR fund being passed yesterday, maybe you could clarify, is this budget now balanced?
Yeah, in response to in response to your question, if the budget's balanced as of the amendment made yesterday regarding the SAR fund, mathematically the budget is balanced. If we're talking about revenues identified and then the appropriations of those revenues, it's mathematically balanced.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It makes the point, and I'm just wondering why we're still proceeding with revenue enhancements. And I do ask, that when we were looking at these revenue enhancements measures, they were designed specifically to address the shortfall. As a result, and as OFB just made it very clear, the budget's now balanced. I'm not sure what are we doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Morrison. Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Cesar Masi, I didn't support the other amendment that increased the cigarette tax. I'm probably not going to support this amendment as well too. And there's several factors here. But before that, I want to just recognize the speaker. Because as long as I've known, as long as I served with him here in this body, this is something that's been very consistent on. And I want to thank him for the hard work he's put into this effort, especially on tobacco taxes. He even got me to support the initiative to raise the age from 18 to 21. But in terms of what we're trying to do here now, Madam Chair, on increasing the taxes here, I don't know, but I'm going to speak for myself, but I hear it loud and clear from our people that they don't want any increases in taxes. And although we can argue, and I'll support that argument, that that tobacco is such a bad thing, I hope, and I ask my friends and family who smoke or are close to me to stop smoking. I just don't believe our government at this point in time is in a position to raise these taxes. We haven't regained their faith and trust that our government is working within our means. I know that there's been efforts by other of our colleagues here to make drastic things happen in this budget, but it doesn't justify us raising the taxes. Although I agree, I'll say it again, I think people should stop smoking. I think people should stop abusing alcohol. But if that's the reason why we're going to raise the taxes, and it's for our government to grab more money, it shouldn't be the case. We heard a previous speaker talk about how yesterday, even to my opposition, that effort of passing the SAR fund appropriations passed, and the affirmation by OFB that the budget we have in front of us is mathematically balanced. And so unless we see where this additional revenue is going to go, for what specific purpose. You know, that's another reason why it makes it hard for me to support this initiative. You know, there are other options. If we're looking at just raising more revenues, Madam Chair, there are other options that we have before us that doesn't include raising taxes. It perhaps will take the will of this body to end certain tax holidays that have been given to certain industries. You know, why are those sacred cows? And so if, you know, and later on as we move on in different sections of this budget, I may propose some of these initiatives, but for a specific purpose. But as it seems here now, are we just trying to bring in more revenue and stick a tax increase to our people? I just think it's wrong. And so, you know, I would join the others to oppose this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Esteves, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did support the increase in tobacco taxes. However, I think the arguments between an increase as a matter of policy decision, an increase to the tobacco tax versus a tax on alcohol beverages, I think draws large contrast. I think the data is very clear in the effects tobacco has on the community. However, responsible uses and responsible alcohol users do not come anywhere near those statistics in terms of people that are killed because of that. I think to call this anything other than a revenue generating mechanism, I think is inappropriate, as opposed to what was argued with the tobacco tax. They're very two different things. And again, there are many responsible drinkers out there. It's used as a matter of celebration. It's also used by your tourists when they come to visit. You know, responsible individuals like to have a good time. And I don't think raising the tax on this, considering we're already raising the tax on the BPT, is going to influence that. So again, I think there's just a huge contrast. In raising the tax on tobacco, I believe we were literally saving lives, but I don't necessarily think that you're going to get the same application with an increase on alcoholic beverages. I think all you're going to do are hurt small businesses that are trying to survive. And so they already have a 5% BPT they have to contend with. I think this would be too much of a shock to the industry for them to be able to manage and be able to absorb. And so with that, Madam Chair, with this particular amendment, I stand in opposition.
Thank you, Senator Esteves. Any other member wish to be heard on this latest San Agustin amendment? We'll take Vice Speaker Terlahi and then Speaker Cruz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Same thing on, I have the same concern with the last amendment and this amendment. It's much easier to support a tax if you know exactly where it's going to go, if you know that, you know, what are we weighing when we are, you know, increasing the cost. And I personally don't have any, I mean, I agree with the whole tobacco tax in general and the alcohol tax as to, you know, that it should be used for prevention purposes. It should be used to ensure that, you know, the health of the people. And so that's why I wanted to clarify the mechanism of when this gets adopted. Is it some kind of automatic revision to these bills that we don't see in front of us that is going to be made? Are we approving that right now? Or are those going to be voted on one by one? Or are we increasing our capacity to, you know, enforce drunk driving or other alcohol, you know, rules and laws, and to prevent the harm that alcohol does in our community? And so I guess, yeah, I'm trying to figure this out in my mind very clearly because there are good uses, I think, that we could put this extra tax to. And I'm in favor of that, but I just think these amendments are not showing us where these things are going to go necessarily in light of what we have in front of us in the rest of the budget. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Speaker Cruz, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, again, this tax, like the previous one, is part of the sin tax that goes into the Healthy Futures Fund, and the Healthy Futures Fund will be used for the special purposes for which the Healthy Futures Fund was created. And in this section of the bill, it would be, it's not the best place to be able to start pointing out exactly where it's going to go. It'll go into the fund, and then it'll be divided up in the later parts of this bill. But that's just addressing the last concern. One of the previous speakers spoke about this not being a life-saving or not having the same. I don't know what newspaper we all read, but the media almost every single day has some story of two drunken co-workers stabbing each other with machetes, two drunks sticking something through someone's eye. Every single day there's an article about this $1 million that's going to be increased here isn't going to be able to do anything to address the amount of time the GPD spends in trying to address all those crimes that are committed by the drunks. Maybe this increase will stop it. I was at a store the other day after I left the gym, and I was watching where they were looking, and they're not buying the regular beers now. They're buying them in these quart containers with labels that I have no idea where they came from to get drunk. So there is a deterrent effect of this, and a very slight revenue increase that won't even cover the criminal justice costs of alcohol. Thank you.
Point of information, Madam Chair, could you please?
I apologize, Vice Speaker. Senator Morrison had a point of information, and then we can take you.
Madam Chair, thank you. If the author would yield.
Oh, so you have a point of inquiry?
Yes.
State your point of inquiry and then...
Thank you, Madam Chair. Understanding, again, that these revenue enhancements were designed for certain shortfalls throughout the budget. I'm just concerned understanding now, I think it's been made very clear that the sin tax goes to the Healthy Futures Fund for specific programs. And my inquiry, Madam Chair, is, or if the author may answer this, or maybe he may know, is there a shortfall in the Healthy Futures Fund?
There isn't a technical shortfall, though I think there is some indication that with this admission of the $14.7 million of non-payment over the last 3 years, that there has been non-payment into the Healthy Futures Fund, but it's not so much that there is a shortfall in the Healthy Futures Fund. The Healthy Futures Fund just hasn't been receiving all the money that it should have been receiving because some people have forgotten to pay or neglected to pay or purposely did not pay. But there is no shortfall in the traditional sense of a shortfall. It's just hasn't been receiving some of the money that it rightfully should have received had the law been properly executed and had everybody honestly reported their sales and the taxes due from them.
Does that satisfy your inquiry? Thank you. Vice Speaker Chalahi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When we voted on the last amendment, you made it clear we were only voting on this amendment and there would be no automatic changes to the rest of the bill. So I guess I just want to clarify that for this amendment as well, because I continue to hear statements that this is going to increase Healthy Future funds and it's going to correspondingly change the numbers of the budget bill that we have in front of us. So if that's the case, that has to be clear. But otherwise, my assumption is when we voted on the last time, that's not what's going to happen. We're going to have to manually change. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. There's been an objection to this amendment. If no one else, any other member wish to be heard, Senator Nelson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe that the previous speaker does have a valid point that is being made. Initially, we came in here with a 5% BPT increase with real property tax on improvements overall. So we didn't have a cap over with $1 million properties or over that we do have now. But the concern is that when we adopt these revenues, and let me back up a little bit, we also addressed the supplement appropriations revenue, which was to make up for the real property tax that we did not, the real property tax overall that we did not vote for as a body to be included in this bill. And so now the question is the SAR was intended to balance out the budget and the cuts. So now we're adopting additional revenue, which in a sense either makes a supplemental revenue moot for the additional revenue that does pass, or are we including this on top of the current budget bill? And I think that is a very valid question, perhaps that can be answered, because if we are just arbitrarily raising taxes after we adopted the SAR, then that is a concern that I have as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. We can get legal to clarify, but it's my understanding that once this tax is increased in Chapter 26, Title 11 of the Guam Code, it details that any of this tax increase would go to the Healthy Futures Fund, and then we would have to subsequently appropriate, which is what the Vice Speaker is saying. Senator San Nicolas, you're recognized. Apologies. Senator Nelson, you can finish.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so that brings the further question. I understand that we also appropriated money in place of the Healthy Futures Fund to fund these specific agencies that the Healthy Futures Fund is supposed to go to. I don't know if it makes sense for the people that are watching, but, and so now we're taxing the people again, not knowing where the general fund revenues are going to go to, not knowing where the Healthy Futures Fund revenues go through. And the concern is that are we doubling up money in attempt to, the concern is that are we increasing certain special funds and we're not removing the general fund appropriations that we put in specific agencies that will receive the special funds. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Senator San Nicolas, you've objected to the amendment?
Yes.
Do you have a point of inquiry or?
Point of information based on the discussion. And I guess I can help guide everyone if we were to turn to page 29 in our budget bill. Because based on the information from the mover of the amendment, the intent is to increase Healthy Future Fund revenues so that you can decrease general fund appropriations, and then with those decreased general fund appropriations, go back and decrease the SAR amount. That's what's been told so far. Unless I'm incorrect, that's the intent of these amendments, and that's part and parcel to why I'm objecting to them, because I believe that if we're going to increase Healthy Futures Fund monies, particularly of these very specific taxes, they should go to increasing program funding specific to those areas, specific to alcohol, specific to tobacco, specific to alcoholism, and specific to cancer. On page 29, under the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, we can see that there's two appropriations, one from a Healthy Futures Fund and another from a general fund. And my understanding is, as we pass these amendments, the intent is to increase the Healthy Futures Fund number so that we can decrease the general fund number, and then by decreasing that general fund number, add back general fund appropriations to the agencies that right now have SAR money appropriated to them. And I think that one of the retiring speakers raised the point multiple times, if we accepted the SAR figure as a reasonable figure, and we are using those hard dollars to balance this budget, then why are we going to take Healthy Futures Fund money and augment it in order to reduce general fund appropriations in order to reduce the SAR number? And I'm objecting to these amendments, Madam Chair, because that's what that's my understanding at this point. That's the intent of these amendments. That the first step is to raise these taxes, so that the next step can be to go in and tweak these appropriations to reduce the SAR figure. And I'm very uncomfortable with raising taxes on tobacco and alcohol and not using those taxes specifically for tobacco and alcohol related programs, specifically for the hospital or specifically for public health. If we're raising these taxes to increase the total number to the Guam Memorial Hospital, leave their general fund appropriation the same, increase their Healthy Futures Fund appropriation, I can probably get behind that. And with that, perhaps work on earmarking some of that to the hospital's additional needs that are previously unreconciled. But if we're just going to be increasing this Healthy Futures Fund number to go in and reduce the general fund number in order to back out the SAR number, then we're basically saying we're going to raise taxes on alcohol and tobacco so we don't have to go out and collect taxes that are outstanding, potentially in alcohol and tobacco. We're going to raise taxes on those honest taxpayers and potentially forego collecting on the ones that still owe. And so long as that's the trajectory of the discussion, Madam Chair, I am uncomfortable supporting these amendments. I'm objecting to these amendments. Because if we're going to be raising taxes on the people deserve to be getting more from their government. These taxes aren't going to just go away. The sunset provisions are removed. So if we're raising taxes on our people, then they should be getting more from their government. They shouldn't be paying higher taxes in order to fill a funding shortfall because we're trying to give wiggle room to the agencies responsible for collecting. We're basically saying we're raising taxes so we don't have to collect taxes. I'm not in support of that. And I want to, as a point of information, clarify, because the question has been raised multiple times by several of my colleagues, exactly how this is going to play out in terms of these tax increases. And right now, unless the mover of the amendment can inform me otherwise, that's what he's already stated on the record is the intent. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Nelson and then Speaker Cruz.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I wholeheartedly agree with the previous speaker as well. I understand the intent and I agree with the intent. However, it should go to the Healthy Futures Funds. However, there's no guarantee within this amendment that we have to raise the alcohol tax, what exactly is going to happen impacting the bill. So I'd like to make an amendment somewhere, perhaps here, that we ensure that this money goes to what it's supposed to be used for, the revenue increase. So just, yeah, I'll work.
Madam Chair, just a point of order. The statute for any of these taxes, as stated by the speaker on multiple occasions, automatically goes into the Healthy Future Funds. And so the amendment, as we're viewing it right now, doesn't go anywhere. And so I think it would be more appropriate in terms of direction of the funds would be if, after this amendment passes or fails, if the mover of the amendment proffers another amendment directing it to whatever intent they have, I think that would be the appropriate place to amend it or argue where it should go. But in terms of whether the tax should be in place or not, I don't believe that amendment belongs here because there's already a direction for the funds to go, and that's the Healthy Future Funds specifically. And so, again, I think we're getting off the topic of discussion on
Thank you.
where the money is going to go, because that would require an entirely different movement by a member of this body. And I think any member of this body can make the direction on where they want the funds to go once they've been adopted. So, again, I don't think those are really relevant to the discussion at hand.
Thank you, Senator Esteves. I'll recognize Speaker Cruz and then Senator Torres.
Just as a point of information, a couple of times GMH has been brought up as somehow being some hole that it shouldn't be, that some of the Healthy Futures Fund money shouldn't be going to. I just want to bring as a point of information, GMH is where those emphysema patients go on their last days. GMH is where those cardiovascular patients go for their medical attention. That's where all the lung cancer people go in their last days unless they get released for hospice. And that's the reason why GMH has to be helped, because it's these individuals that have no ability to be able to pay. And we're just trying to augment their operations because people have, as it were, sinned and using the sin tax to pay for it.
Thank you, Speaker Cruz. Senator Torres, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to proffer an amendment to this amendment. In the very first line, after the title, Section 26302, Excise Tax on Alcoholic Beverages, the first line after that contains an exception to the tax. The line reads, an excise tax is imposed upon all alcoholic beverages, parentheses, except alcoholic beverages manufactured in Guam, close paren. My amendment would be to strike that section in parentheses, except alcoholic beverages manufactured in Guam. I believe in following the discussion here about the logical reasons behind imposing a sin tax, I think that all sin product in this case should be taxed, whether it's manufactured in Guam or otherwise. And I believe that any preference for a Guam-made product, there are other considerations in various policies that have benefits to that sort of a scenario. So in this case, for excise tax on alcoholic beverages, I would proffer that, although it goes against the definition of excise, and I wonder if that's the issue here. Perhaps it should just be a question that, let me withdraw that temporarily. I think my train of thought was interrupted by a second thought that just occurred. So I withdraw that.
On the San Augustine amendment, any member wish to be heard? On the San Augustine amendment, there's been an objection. If not, Senator San Augustine, you're invited to close.
Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, in reference to the effective date, it's, I think I mentioned that earlier in the beginning, that it'll be striked down as effective October 1st, 2018, the upcoming year.
So, Senator, just to clarify, in the previous amendment, it was effective immediately, but on this one, you would like to keep the words effective date and then the language, notwithstanding any other provision of law, rule or regulation, the provisions adopted in Section 2 of this Act shall only be in effect from October 1st, 2018, period. Okay.
Yes.
On that amendment, any member wish to be heard? If not, Senator San Augustine, you wish to close? You done? Senator Torres, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, please excuse me for being a little, I had a bit of confusion on the terminology of what an excise tax was, and which is the reason that I withdrew my prior proposal for an amendment to this amendment. But I believe that in looking at the nature of an excise tax, that it may not be inappropriate to strike that one exception on alcoholic beverages manufactured in Guam. So I would like to, if I may.
I apologize, Senator Torres. We'll just dispense with this San Augustine amendment to amend the effective date.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm out of order. Okay,
sure.
Forgive me, sorry.
On the San Augustine amendment to change the effective date and remove the sunset provision of September 30th, 2019. Any objection? Hearing none, amendment passes. Senator Torres, you're recognized on your amendment.
Madam Speaker, my amendment is to strike the exception on alcoholic beverages manufactured in Guam, contained in the line immediately following the title, the line which reads, an excise tax is imposed upon all alcoholic beverages, paren, except alcoholic beverages manufactured in Guam, close paren. So my amendment would be to strike that exception to beverages manufactured in Guam.
Thank you, Senator Torres. On the Torres amendment, any member wish to be heard? Senator Esteves. Okay. There's been an objection to the Torres amendment. Want to speak on it? Senator Esteves.
Madam Chair, just to state the reason for my objection, this tax increase has been publicly heard. However, I think removing an exemption from an existing industry without any consultation or without any awareness or input on their behalf, I think is unconscionable moving forward. I think the industry is aware that the potential of taxes may go up on alcoholic beverages or products that they sell, but I think without it being publicly heard and individuals who this would affect to have their day before this legislature to testify and provide public input as to why it should not be struck. For those reasons, Madam Chair, I object to this particular amendment.
Thank you, Senator Esteves. There's been an objection on the amendment. Senator Muña and then Senator Torres.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe this question could be posed to the original author of the amendment. I'm curious of the purpose of putting it in there. Was it to help local businesses that?
Senator San Augustine, do you yield?
I'm just curious why it was in there in the first place, the exception. And then I guess the other question would also be, if we strike it out, how much more revenue will it generate? So I guess those are my two questions.
Senator San Augustine, do you yield?
Yes. Madam Chair, that's been in the law. And if you want to talk about the alcohol that's manufactured in Guam, I think one closed and it's going to open up again very soon. The Carabao Inn, and it used to be the brewery that we had in Tamuning. That's the only reason why they exempted it, was because for the folks that are opening their own brewery, building alcohol, that's the intent. Now, but we can strike it out. I have no problem with that one. And how much it'll generate, I don't know. I don't know what they're generating today. Matter of fact, the folks that are doing that are not even open yet. You know, 2 of them have closed. So there's no money there right now. But if the intent is to remove it, then so be it.
Senator Muñoz, does that satisfy your inquiry?
Yeah, I was just wondering why it was there in the first place. I mean, if it is to help local businesses, I can support that, but I just wondered why it was even there in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Torres, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, I just want to also point out again that the reason that I'm proffering this amendment is if this is indeed a sin tax, then the sin on all those sin products, I believe, should be consistent, and that's my only reason for proffering that amendment. And then, as it was stated by the mover of the original amendment, as we're aware, there are no establishments or businesses on Guam that actually distill products. So right now we're at base 0. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Torres. On the Torres amendment, there's been an objection. Any other member wish to be heard? If not, we'll call for the question. On the Torres amendment to strike the words "except alcoholic beverages manufactured in Guam," all those in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. On the Torres amendment to strike "except alcoholic beverages manufactured in Guam," so to include everyone into this tax, please indicate by raising your hand. Amendment fails. Senator Torres? On the San Augustine amendment, any member wish to be heard? Senator San Augustine? Okay, we'll call for the question. So on the San Augustine amendment to increase the tax on alcoholic beverages, all those in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. Amendment fails. Senator San Augustine, you're recognized. Okay.
I have nothing else, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Any other senator have amendments to this section of our... Senator Esteves, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, if I could just ask, without having to make the amendment based on the amendment that did pass with regards to the increase in tobacco tax, could we get an updated figure on the Healthy Future Fund, or at least based on 323 as it currently stands, what is available now for appropriation within the Healthy Future Funds?
Thank you, Senator
Can I request
Esteves.
a recess for that?
We'll take a brief recess.
Colleagues, we are currently in section 2, which is revenue enhancement, revenue generating. If it's revenue generating, then have the amendment. If it's going to be expenditures on how to spend it, save it for the later section when we're in expenditures. We're right now just in section 2 in revenue generating. Okay? So if you have amendments, I'll take a short recess. For those of you having, preparing revenue generating proposals. Otherwise, let's move on and let's get through the next several sections in this budget. We're still on page 2. Committee of the Whole is back in order. Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have an amendment for the revenue section, but I've actually corresponded it to the area that it would be earmarked for. I'd like to proffer it as a single amendment, and that is to the Healthy Futures Fund number, which now adjusts upward by a total of,
9348.
$9,348,746. And so we're increasing that now to the Healthy Futures Fund number. This amount reflects the tobacco tax increase. And the subsequent page to that increase would be to program that money into the Guam Memorial Hospital Healthy Futures Fund appropriation, which blends it with the existing $4 million to raise the total sum to $14,111,000 and to appropriate $11 million of the 14 for the labor and delivery ward renovations for fiscal year 2019, and the remaining $3.1 million for operational expenses. Mr. Chairman, this is also being done in the context of what I understand is additional revenues being provided from the tax amnesty that is in the bill, and also other amendments that I think will be forthcoming. But this basically ensures that this tax increase is going to healthcare. It's going to fund a project that's been outstanding. And as one of the co-sponsors of the amendment, Senator Esteves referenced, it's actually going to fund a project without actually borrowing for it, which is kind of novel in this government. I'd like to thank Senator Rodriguez and Senator Esteves for their co-sponsorship of this amendment and their collaboration, which helped us to figure out exactly how to program the funds into the amendment that we're proposing. And hopefully, Mr. Chairman, with the passage of this, we can not only address the deaths associated with smoking, but fund new life. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other senator wish to be heard on the Nicholas amendment? Senator Esteves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank my colleagues, Senator Nicholas and Senator Rodriguez, for working collaboratively on this amendment. And just to reiterate the point, I mean, I couldn't say when was the last time in the government of Guam we were able to fund such an endeavor, something as tangible as this, that's going to be usable and that will provide a return on this investment without having to borrow. I'm really excited if this amendment passes, because I think it really sets the bar in new policy. And I think, Mr. Chairman, this is the thing that people want to see. People want to see their tax dollars, especially if we're raising taxes, going to something that they can feel, something that they can touch, something that they know is for their benefit. I don't think people want to see tax dollars going to an employee they'll never meet or whose service they'll never utilize, that they'll be subsidizing for a long period of time. So again, you know, I'm thankful for my colleagues for working on this amendment. I ask my other colleagues to please support it. It is an outstanding project. I know the Guam Memorial Hospital has a lot of other needs. I believe that those things are going to be addressed with the tax amnesty money that's currently available, and it's going to be available much sooner than this money would be available. But I think looking forward and projecting into the future with the upcoming fiscal year, the tangible nature of this initiative, I think, speaks for itself, Mr. Chairman. So I ask my colleagues to lend their support to this particular amendment.
Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Rodriguez.
Seduce Masi, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, of course, I rise in support. I want to thank Senator Nicholas and Senator Esteves for joining together in moving this forward. Just to echo the sentiments of the previous speaker, I believe this will probably be one of the first times that we're able to do a capital improvement project and not have to borrow for it, and that it can be potentially paid off in one fiscal year. You know, this really is in tribute to the hardworking individuals that have worked very hard, yourself included, Mr. Speaker, in previous legislatures that we were a part of. This journey began, I believe, 4 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. and a lot of work has been put into it. Investments, financial investments have been put in to the A&E, and things just haven't aligned where we're able to get the funding source. And so this is a real funding source now that, that we have increased a certain tax, and that we'll be able to finally move this labor and delivery ward renovations forward. I know that there are other issues that we must address with GMH, but this is one of those that you know, we're going to have to ensure that we move forward on, despite the challenges that are, you know, that are being faced, because we know that this is one department in the hospital that really is a revenue generating. So that's one aspect, but it's also one of the departments in the hospital that really needs the attention of our community, because that's where life is brought into. And so when you take a look at the circumstances that mothers have to go through, my wife having to go, you know, through that experience 3 times, you know, with our kids, we know firsthand what it's like and what this renovation is going to do for the future of our community. So I ask our colleague to support this measure. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Muñoz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm looking at the section that was originally amended, and it says $4,763,006 for operational expenses, and then the amended version has only $3,111,752 for operational expenses. Is there a reason why they reduced it down like 1 million? So the appropriation for operational expenses went down so that they could give 11 million to the labor and delivery. Is that why they did that? Okay. Does that affect the operational expenses?
They're getting an additional 28 million, which is more than they had last year. So
in the first place. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Any other senator wish to be heard? Any objection to the amendment? You object? Go ahead, Madam Vice Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, I'm trying to catch up as fast as I can, but can you just tell me, after this amendment, is there any additional from the 9 million left? There will be none? The entire 9 million is going towards this? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have no objection to funding the construction of a labor and delivery ward, Mr. Speaker, and I'm thanking the men in here for their concern about us women and the labor and delivery ward. And I know that there have been doctors who are very much in support of this, and so I have no objection to any of that. My only question is, it's very confusing that I've been to almost every hearing where GMH has been, and I understand they had other potential funding for this. USDA was involved, and then it fell through, and then they were trying to get an extension and all kinds of things. But all I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, is that I'm trying to figure out where on their CMS list of priorities was this, and whether the 5 million that we're allocating for their CMS priorities is enough, given the broken roof, the all those other things that they have come in and said. I mean, I'll give it to you that they've been, you know, they've been a little bit confusing as to what their priorities are. But in all the lists that they've submitted, this was not one, from my recollection. However, if I just guess I want to be clear that we are departing now from CMS as the priority to this, or are you saying that the 5 million for the CMS is adequate for the CMS list of priorities, including fixing the roof, the electrical panel, all those things that they came down here and told us that they needed to do?
The hospital currently, under the budget as was originally submitted, was getting $30 million for their operations. The $5 million from the tax amnesty was something that we came up with at that last hearing, when we were going through with Department of Administration. And this is additional. They'll be able to deal with whatever other needs they have. I mean, they took care of, under their calculation, 80% of what they needed to, no, 60% of the CMS deficiencies before they even came to us. So with the 30 million operational, they should be able to meet it with the additional 5 million. The 5 million we wanted to give them for immediate, for this fiscal year, not waiting until money is raised in the next fiscal year. Also, this money is going, this 9 million will have to be raised over the next fiscal year. The 5 million is immediate because that's tax amnesty that we hope that will be received by September the 5th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, my read of this amendment is just that an additional 3 million is going to go towards, well, 11 million is going towards the labor and delivery, and only additional 3 million is going for operational expenses. It's not clear that it's going to be used for the CMS priorities or anything. It's kind of like we're leaving it up to them, which is fine with me. I just know that one of the estimates that they gave us was $5 million for the electrical panel alone. And that was not even addressing the roof. So I'm just concerned about the cost of those major ticket items that they have been putting off and getting extensions on. And that operational money, I think, is different than, capital improvement money for them. If we give them this all in operational, they always say they've been operating at a $30 million deficit, that they need 30 million to cover the cost of uninsured. And so if they use it all for those types of things, Mr. Speaker, then there's still that gap for those big projects that need to be done. I think we all can see that when we walk in there. That's all, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard on this Nicholas amendment? Senator Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly wish there was a more comprehensive approach to these amendments being made, Mr. Chair. Seems like we're just shooting from the hip, tax here so we can cover here. And again, the previous speaker makes a excellent point, and I know CMS was on the high priority, and a lot of other outstanding issues with the hospital, a lot of outstanding issues within this entire government that we have to address. And while we're cutting agencies, a lot of agencies cutting back, forcing the government to cut back, it put us in a difficult spot, put a lot of members here in a difficult spot with this amendment. Understanding there's so many priorities out there. And we know that that's been an outstanding issue for many, many years at the hospital, that project. And I'm just concerned of if we're really doing this in a very comprehensive manner. The previous speaker spoke very clearly about the CMS report and the established listing of concerns at the hospital. But I just hope we're not going down this road where we've addressed the shortfall with the SAR fund, the budget's balanced. Now let's start taxing, increasing taxes so we can pick a project and throw it right at it. I'm not saying it's not an important project, but I don't think that was, at least in my mind, it wasn't my understanding of why we were using these revenue enhancements. So I just wanted to make that clear, Mr. Chair. I hope that we're really thinking this through when there's additional monies, and you know, and having a comprehensive approach to these amendments. And it didn't seem like anybody knew where that money was going to go, and all of a sudden, you know, we just threw it at a project. But it was my understanding was these were to cover shortfalls, and certainly there are a lot of shortfalls within this government. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard on this Nicholas amendment? If not, is Senator Lee, you haven't been heard, recognized yet.
I'd just like to request a 1-minute recess. I'm printing out the list of priority needs for GMH that was mentioned before, so I just wanted to be able to go over that with the corresponding costs that they gave us in the most recent public hearing, so we can have a better understanding of what their needs were and the $30 million that you were talking about, just so we can have a more
They will
comprehensive...
you can never give them enough money. The 30 is not sufficient to meet the CMS and other things.
Understand, but I also just want to see where on this priority needs listing the labor and delivery ward renovations were.
It's not. But we'll take a short recess.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Lee, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just as a point of information for my colleagues, in the July 9th, 2018 public hearing or information that we received from GMH, they detailed CMS and Joint Commission citations with direct funding requirements. Of note, the most important things that they wanted to mention were clinical needs, so IT system upgrade to integrate better workflow for nurses and doctors, clinical documentation for efficiency, and a number of citations in the document. Also, this will help them to address meaningful use and merit-based incentive programs, MIPS, that they were speaking to us about, those requirements, which will reduce the reimbursement to the hospital if not met, and that comes in at $20 million. There were also a number of citations, 14,000 for certified professionals in healthcare risk management, $22,000 hospital safety learning system, which is an online computer-based risk system. And then physical environment, there are a number of things that were detailed here to include fire pump assembly, test and drain valves, walkway east and west, egress doors, hazardous area enclosures, cafeteria doors, roof repair, which comes in at $5 million, and then $2 million for closed circuit TV and access control system, maintenance program software. And then there are a number of positions that needed to be filled. These numbers don't include the benefits, but case manager positions at $338,000. Infection control preventionist, that's two positions at $156,000. Patient safety officer at $93,600. Hospital nurse risk management program officer, $94,531. Hospital risk management specialist at $85,696. There's also an asterisk at the bottom of this report that details that these needs are identified as of this date and that this list is not all-inclusive. So there may be other things that CMS or the Joint Commission citations would mandate us or that they request that we consider, that we try to address. And I know that GMH has done a number of things to address some of these CMS citations without the funding, but it's really important that, you know, they're continuing to tell us that they need, these are what their needs are. So I think we need to listen to our healthcare professionals when they say that they need IT system upgrades, when they say they need fire pump assembly. These are things that will benefit the entire hospital. And it's also my understanding at the bottom of this amendment that GMH Labor and Delivery Award renovation funding is slated to receive a certain amount in this fiscal year. So we're still, if this amendment doesn't pass, we still, as a body, will commit to supporting this effort, commit to supporting GMHA Labor and Delivery Award and renovations. So it's not that that's not a priority, but losing CMS should be our primary priority, our utmost priority at this point. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Senator Rodriguez has a point of information to provide.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I can't, well, the previous speaker spoke on statements on CMS and what's needed, and I agree with her. The fact is that you have in this bill, Mr. Speaker, a provision that uses $5 million from tax amnesty proceeds for immediate use once and if this act is approved by the governor. There's also an initiative that's going to be introduced later on, and I believe the more appropriate area for us to discuss this is the miscellaneous provision, is to use the remaining tax amnesty proceeds for the CMS deficiencies. And so, you know, although, you know, I do agree that, you know, we need to find the resources that's needed to correct these deficiencies, what's more important is that these funds need to be made available immediately. And so the approach that is being taken now by yourself in the amendment that you have and this amendment that we will be offering later on in this budget bill will provide the immediate funds to GMH. And although it's not going to come close to the, I believe, I don't know if it was over $50 million that's needed, it's going to provide them the resources that's going to address the corrective actions that they have provided to CMS. And so I just want to be able to provide that information to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard on this motion? On this amendment? Senator Esteves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to add a bit more, and so we're all very clear, GMH in the budget is getting a more than 40% increase from what they received last year in terms of appropriation. Specifically, particularly towards operations. So all of these things and initiatives that need to happen, everybody is aware it's not going to happen overnight. As long as the funding source stays consistent moving into the future, we should see some substantial changes in the way they operate. But if you were to go further and actually read the CMS report and Joint Commission, a lot of it is operational and governance, cannot directly be tied to funding. So a lot of these is in large part governance and in some part funding. So I'd be very weary, at least based on the CMS report as it reads and as it's reported out. It doesn't say you might lose your CMS report or you might lose your CMS certification because your roof tiles are leaking. It's other things, such as, you're giving privileges to a doctor that shouldn't have because you didn't do your verification. If somehow you can tell me that requires additional funding, I'd be very surprised when there's people paid to do that specific task. But moving forward, besides the 40% increase in funding, there are initiatives to provide them immediate funding to address immediate needs right now. But with the promotion and the renovation of the labor and delivery ward, what that does is it provides revenue to the Guam Memorial Hospital. That's one of the very few revenue generators of the Guam Memorial Hospital. So if we want to look at the Guam Memorial Hospital and care about a long-term solution, this would be one of the avenues we can take. Unless we want to just dump a bunch of money, give them the list, and find something to get mad about later without really addressing the issue. But the issue is going to be revenue. And it's not always going to be just subsidizing them with taxpayer dollars in large part. We have to look at long-term solutions of revenue generation. And so when we look at this amendment, don't look at this as, an initiative because one guy pushed it. Don't look at it as an initiative because it's a want, not a need. Look at it for what it is. A revenue-generating source, long-term revenue-generating source for the Guam Memorial Hospital, which in time will reduce the need of general fund appropriation required to operate it. These are the types of forward-thinking initiatives that's needed when addressing the Guam Memorial Hospital, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other senator wish? Senator Munya, then Senator, you didn't want? Senator Nelson.
Just a quick question for the retiring speaker, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker. If you would yield, he mentioned that the labor delivery ward is a revenue-generating function within Guam Memorial Hospital. So perhaps he could share the amount of revenue that we've seen within the past FY17, FY18, specifically for the labor and delivery ward.
Do you yield?
Mr. Chairman, because of the nature of the question and we are on the official record, I'll request a recess and I'll go get that information for my colleague so that it is accurate as reported on the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd just like to add, Mr. Chair, that during the course of the year, we've had a hearse parked outside this building. We've had Guam Memorial Hospital employees come down and declare that people are dying in the hospital because the legislature will not fund us. So I'm a little bit concerned about us prioritizing this money to a specific function when we don't address other issues. We cannot address the other issues that are plaguing the hospital as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. While Senator Esteves is trying to get that information, any other senator wish to be heard? On the Nicholas amendment, it's that front page with the understanding in the same way that you've been asking all day, where is it going to go to? You're the one that kept insisting on wanting to know where it was going to.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, but
those questions were never clarified. In fact, the opposite. It was very much clear that, in fact, you made a rule right before our recess that we were not going to make appropriations contrary to how we did the SAR fund, and we completely appropriated that out. That it just needs to be clear, Mr. Speaker, what we're doing, because this understanding stuff is, to me, it's vague, and it's going to cause problems in the end. I think you just need to be very, very clear.
On this, Nicholas, Senator Argan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I certainly am pleased to see that, in fact, the resources are being allocated towards GMH. But I think that one thing that we need to be reminded of is that we're giving the same individuals who brought us to where we are today the additional funding allocation. And that, to me, is a challenge that I have, knowing full well that there's been an outcry. They need additional $30 million a year to be able to continue to operate. Now we're giving them those resources. But one thing that's notable here is that, in fact, $11 million is set aside specifically, or would be set aside specifically, for the labor and delivery ward, rather than this government committing itself to borrowing money again. So that, to me, is a consolation in terms of providing these resources. But again, when there continues to be an outcry, we need money for GMH, we need money for GMH, we need money for GMH, and they collect $16 million in tax amnesty, actual cash, and then a month later, they tell you as chair during one of the public hearings that they need authorization to give any of those tax amnesty cash to GMH to address the CMS issues as well as the accreditation issues. To me, that's a major disconnect. And also to acknowledge that, in fact, the leadership at GMH, not once, based on their confirmation at 2 separate hearings, not once requested for additional financial support from the executive branch, from the governor of Guam, as it applies towards receiving any of the additional amnesty funds. So we are on the verge of allocating additional resources to GMH, and I've always recognized that they're going to need, GMH is in need of external financing and additional funding. But the individuals, the leadership is still there. Whether you want to refer to the CMS or you want to refer to the joint accreditation, approximately, my understanding is 80–85% of those issues are management issues, not funding issues. So I just want to remind us colleagues in here that that is presently the situation at GMH, and throwing them more money, hopefully they won't have to blame this legislative body for not giving them any additional resources, when that's exactly what this proposal would provide, as well as this entire budget. So there should be no more excuses in terms of financing the operations of the hospital. They should be able to take care of the facility requirements. They should be able to take care of their operational requirements and provide good, quality, safe healthcare treatment to our people. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard on this Nicholas amendment? Any other senator? Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it's actually all I have is a question. In the original bill, or in the bill in its original form, $600,000 was appropriated from the general fund for the labor and delivery ward. And the question is, what happens to that?
When we get to it, we can address it. The $600,000 was put in there as their payment for a loan that we thought that they were going to be getting.
Okay.
So we've been planning for it. But if it's going to be built without having to make any loan, then we can address that 600 when we get to it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other senator wish to be heard on this Nicholas amendment?
As a point of inquiry, Mr. Speaker, does this, we're talking about the first page only. Does this Is this the recalculation that OFB did during the recess? Is this the only recalculation in the bill?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And Senator Nicholas just wanted to make it clear that this 41 million would then be used, part of it be used this way, in the same way that you kept asking, what was the healthy funds going to be used for, and you wanted to know exactly where. Any other senator wish to be heard? If not, you may close. Yes. It's both of them so that you know where it's going to go.
Well, I object, Mr. Speaker, because before the recess,
Thank
you
you.
just made a
The
rule
objection
for
has
us
been noted.
that we were not going to proceed that way. So we are reducing reducing the Healthy Future Fund's appropriation to GMH for operational expenses by $1 million, after you told them you're going to give them $30 million or something like that.
Senator Hagan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to our colleagues, I beg your indulgence. In the mandate, the statute, it recognizes that 28% of the Healthy Future Funds is automatically allocated towards specific areas. The remaining balance of 72% now is subject to appropriation by this body. My question is because the entire amount, based on the actions of the body previously with the previous amendment, now would allocate that total amount. So what would happen to the percentage? Otherwise, we would have to insert a clause here, the infamous notwithstanding, just so that in fact it's consistent and it's acknowledged that the body here wants any additional resources that will be generated to be in compliance with the mandate that is already in law. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Take a short recess. If you want to just make the amendment and put it in, so that we can go. All right, so at the top of the
Mr. Chairman, if I may advise, the amendment would read, after GCA, comma, and notwithstanding any other provision of law, comma.
If I may suggest also, Mr. Speaker, and to the good senator, because we are referencing the same clause, that's the provision right there, subsection 26603, chapter 26, title 11, that's the exact code that allocates 28% to be subdivided to GMH, 12% to GMH, a certain percentage to other agencies. So perhaps we can, rather than a general notwithstanding clause, maybe a provision that recognizes that in spite of this chapter, the following amounts will be allocated.
I think more appropriately it should be strike the pursuant to and just notwithstanding 26.620. All right. Yes, Vice Speaker.
Is that an amendment, Mr. Speaker?
It's the amendment by Senator Hagan to put notwithstanding in place of pursuant to.
So on the amendment, could we just clarify, what is the 12% of the Healthy Future Fund right now? Or with the increase in tobacco tax? Or did they both pass? No, with the increase in the tobacco tax. Because the statute says 12% for operational and then part of the 72% also for health.
And
So I just want to know
And
if
with the
this-
notwithstanding, it's notwithstanding that.
I understand. I just want to know how far off are we, or do we exceed that amount on operational expenses? Do we know the 12% of the Healthy Future Fund? I can't hear. Is that a-
Ms.
On the microphone, please, so we can hear.
does OFB have a calculation?
It seems to be 4.639.
4.970360004. $4,970,360.04.
That's only the 12%. That doesn't include anything from the 72% of the Healthy Future Fund that's also supposed to be allocated towards health. Only 12% was supposed to go towards operational expenses of the hospital.
And what this amendment is doing is notwithstanding the Healthy Futures Fund provision on the divisions that should be in that, this should have gone into and divided. Notwithstanding that, this entire increase is going to go to GMH.
Point of information, Mr. Speaker, if I may. Just in response to her question, the original revenue projection for the Healthy Futures Fund would have allocated 12%, which is $3.6 million. Now with the amended, should this amendment pass, with the amended numerical number that's being applied, that would increase to $4.96 million, which is equivalent to the 12% total, if the entire amount wasn't given to, the entire $9 million wasn't allocated to GMH. So what would the difference otherwise be? 1.36.
That's correct. So by our new budget bill, we are reducing the operational allocation, the allocation for operational expenses of GMH. So instead of 12%, we're giving them $1 million less for operational expenses from the Healthy Futures Fund.
The difference is because they're trying to get to 11 million. They're giving
I understand, Mr. Speaker. I'm just saying operational is totally different. That's why the statute's set up like that. It's very different than putting it towards a pet project.
Thank you. We'll take the vote. Do you wish to close?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I guess that's where we can kind of start things off with about whether or not this is a pet project. Mr. Chairman, this is priority one of the capital improvement projects of the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority based on their own budget submission. It's not a pet project, it's priority one of the agency. But what's exceptional about us pursuing it this way is we're not going to borrow for this project. It's not going to turn into a 30-year liability and cost us $33 million when you factor in interest on a bond. It's not going to impact the debt ceiling of the government of Guam. And it's actually going to fund it within one fiscal year. Now, the project may take several years, but it'll be fully paid for up front. By this time next year, this $9 million can get programmed elsewhere for another project, and then another project after that, and then another project after that. In the budget that you've crafted, Mr. Chairman, prior to the availability of these new revenues, nobody was clamoring about how much was going to be going to CMS projects, because your budget had already addressed that in a variety of ways. We even have other amendments that are looking to program additional amnesty money for that very purpose. And my colleague from Derido rightly pointed out that the CMS priorities have a period certain. This appropriation is for Healthy Futures Fund revenues that don't begin accruing until October 1. They don't begin accruing until October 1. So you can pull up all the CMS listings you want and talk about those priorities, There's no funding for that from this revenue source until after October 1. And that funding source accrues after October 1. So the way an appropriation works is they know they have the money available. They can now go out, and by the way, they've already done the architectural engineering on this project. This was initiated several legislative terms ago. And one of the concessions from the medical professionals who are advocating for this project was to go out first and do the architectural and engineering, find out exactly how much this project would cost, so that we don't go out and borrow a bond for some random figure and then all of a sudden try and figure out how to spend it all. This appropriation will close the loop on perhaps what would be the most responsibly executed capital improvement project in this government in a very long time, because its A&E would have been funded by cash, and its actual project costs would have been funded by cash. No debt, no interest expense on a project that's revenue generating for the hospital. So not only is it going to not add to our cost burdens, it's going to offset the shortfalls in the hospital, not by subsidies, but by generating its own revenue. I cannot see any adverse issues with any of that. And it being the priority one capital improvement project of the hospital only underscores the fact that those very same medical professionals are the ones who want this project to get done. The other good thing about this being an appropriation that gets funded in the next fiscal year is that there's a likelihood we may have a new management team in place to execute it. So the management concerns will be ameliorated if that is the case. This project has been on the books, it's been outstanding. And when I listened to the CMS concerns that were raised about where else the other money can go, if the option is to instead go off and do a whole bunch of hiring, I'm not comfortable with that. I mean, if we can knock this project out of the park in 1 year, we can hire next year, if that's really what you want to do. If you want to upgrade the IT system, the $9 million isn't enough to do that. But we can still knock this project out of the park next fiscal year, have $9 million next fiscal year, maybe more on top of that, because we're also going to be having tobacco tax stamps bringing in more Healthy Futures Fund revenue, and maybe more on top of that because we're going to have positive cash flow from a labor and delivery ward. This is the difference between spending money to address Band-Aid solutions or actually investing the money on projects that we've already had commitments made on. The A&D is, the architectural engineering is already done. We can get this project done. I would prefer that we do it with this kind of a funding source and be able to have the money available next fiscal year for other projects than for us to instead go with the previous option, which was to spend $600,000 to figure out how to go and borrow. Our people are adverse to borrowing. And if we can actually fund a project without borrowing for once, wouldn't that be a very exciting thing to do in our budget? And so we increased the tobacco tax, okay, but now we can go back and say we increased it, and anytime any of you are going to bring your loved ones up here and bring new life into this world, that's where your tax is going. It's not going to some project listing. It's going to something that it's going to have a return on investment for generations. A project was vetted, it was brought before this body, and now's an opportunity for us to fund it. On top of all the other commitments that you've made, Mr. Chairman, in this budget for the immediate needs of the CMS concerns, which are, as I mentioned, a period certain, they got to be addressed right away. So let's use the money, the cash that we have readily available. But I ask my colleagues to please support these amendments. I appreciate the input from my colleagues, as well as the support and collaboration from Senator Rodriguez and Senator Esteves. And wow, if we can just close the loop on this with this unexpected revenue source, wouldn't that be fantastic? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. On the Sir Nicholas amendment, was there an objection? There's an objection. All those in favor,
Mr.
please
Speaker,
indicate by raising.
If we could get a 1-minute recess, I called Peter John to ask him if this is number one on the hospital's capital improvement priority listing, and he said he'd get back to me in just a few minutes. If it is, then I have no objection. I just want to know, because that's not what they said to us during all those public hearings that I attended, Mr. Speaker.
The publications that have come out,
Well, they're not in front of us. Those were not what we were presented at the hearing, Mr. Speaker.
We're going to vote at this point. All those in favor.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. The retiring speaker said that if she can get the information showing it's priority one, then she will not object. And if she does not object, there's no objection on the floor, and there wouldn't even be a need for a vote. So if I could ask that we yield to the health chair to be able to just provide that information, I'm confident that we can move forward cleanly.
We'll have the health chair speak, and hopefully that's sufficient.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I could confirm that part of the CIP priority needs of the hospital, that this labor and delivery ward renovation is listed as priority one. And I believe OFB should also have that same document that was presented.
We'll take a recess, call Peter John, get the answer, and then let's vote. We're on the vote on the St. Nicholas Amendment. Everyone's received on their WhatsApp the priority listing that was provided to us by GMHA for FY18. Madam Vice Speaker, do you still wish to object?
Mr. Speaker, I just got this right now. I'm trying to open it up. It's still loading, I guess. Does anyone have this? Anyways, in my call with Peter John, so he confirmed that there are several things on the priority one listing according to the budget submission from the hospital to the legislature. And yes, this part is part of the priority one listing, but there's also the info technology, 17.2 million. The roof is, the upgrade of the roof is a $5 million project. It's also a priority one project. Upgrade of the electrical panel is a $6 million project. That's also in the priority one project. I don't have the whole list. Oh, here's one. But anyways, I just want to point out there are other things on priority one. That doesn't mean it's the number one priority.
Okay.
It's
Does
part
that
of
mean
the
you're
list of
objecting?
these things. Yes, Mr. Speaker.
There's an objection. All those in favor of the St. Nicholas Amendment, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion passes. Now can we gavel through section 2 and move on to section 3? Anybody else in section 2? Going once? Anyone in section 2 going twice? Anyone in section 2 going 3 times? Section 3, estimated revenues for FY18 with the amendments made by this amendment and the SAR amendment at U. Anyone wish to address any of the revenues listed starting on page 2? Senator Lee, did your hand go up?
I apologize, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted some clarification. So it's the section 3 that's listed on page 2, because there's also a section 3 on page 6. So I think maybe we're just
on
out
page
of order.
2.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone wish any clarifications on page 2? If not, can we move to page 3? On page 2, any clarifications? On page 3, any clarifications anybody needs? Or any questions? On page 3? On page 4. Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I just get clarification on line 14, why Manpower Development Fund? I know this was mentioned at the beginning of the session, but if OFB could just walk us through the numbers on that. Thank you.
So line 14 of page 4 is relative to the Manpower Development Fund. OFB estimated it to be $1,355,554. We took the 3-year average of the FY 14, 15, and 16 when H-2B workers were at similar levels that we expected to be in FY 19, and we grew that with the 3-year average of those 3 fiscal years. So we didn't use FY 17 or 18 tracking data simply because those were years that had less H-2B workers. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other clarifications you wish on page 4? On page 5, and I want to remind everybody that there is a new AU That would be 12 and a half, or 12 point. The SAR is now is inserted there where the new section AU.
Speaker?
The amount that was agreed to was $18,480,075.
Corrections, Mr. Speaker, we upped that to 20 million with the restoration using SAR money to the legislature, governor's office.
Yeah. I apologize.
Mr. Speaker?
What is the number now?
Point of information.
20,631,698. $20,631,698.
Is that the only changes on page 5?
Yes, and we're going to have to, do it, the total special fund is going to have to change.
But the line number 9 wasn't changed, the TEF?
Correct. The what?
The TEF should be changed.
Territorial Educational Facilities Fund. Did it ever change?
The TEF will be 38,301,107.
107. The Tourist Attraction Fund, it didn't change, it's still 44 million?
I don't think we passed the HOT. It was reconsidered.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
So we'll just, yes.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, can you verify the Guam Highway Fund on page 4, line 1? FY18, it was 22 million. This one's 24,255,000. Does that reflect the increase in the liquid fuels tax? Because then that's less than what was estimated was going to come in. Is that right?
You want to explain how you got it?
For the Guam Highway Fund, we took into consideration the increased tax rate for liquid fuel tax. So that's the number we came up with based on our method.
You're going to have to speak.
Yeah, for the Guam Highway Fund, that took into consideration the increased liquid fuel tax rate. Yeah, what we did was we took the average of actual collections from February to June, and then we estimated that because that was the increased that's when the increased tax collections started becoming collected.
Last part one more time.
We took the average of the actual collections from February through June,
Okay.
which is when the increased tax collections were effective.
Okay, thank you.
And then we projected that out for a full fiscal year.
Any other questions on either 4 or 5? Let's complete 4. Anybody else on 4 that has any questions? What's the total special fund now with those 2 in there?
Mr. Speaker, if there's any changes in the amount, if it can be announced so that we don't have to ask it, I mean, if Ricky, the office of, okay, thank you.
And with the increase in TEF and the Healthy Futures, is that Healthy Futures and SAR? You have all 3? Oh. It was 266,363,500 $516. That's what the adjustments for. Because we had to reduce the TEF, we didn't raise as much. It was only 8 plus the 8. We subtract 8, added 16, and it comes out to 266.
So that'll be line 13, correct?
Pardon?
That's line 13 on page
Yes,
5?
for the total special fund revenue.
Okay, and that's 266?
Yes, $266,363,516.
Thank you.
What's the next page that's going to have the add? On page 6. Okay. On the rest of page 5, any other questions? For the rest of the revenue, OFB has asked that they're making some technical, and we'll get that out to you. But amendments. Actually, they provided the general fund total on line 4 will now read 621, 124, 137. No change. On special fund, it'll read 266, 363, 516. There's no change in the federal matching, so therefore the grand total will now be 965, 103, 965, 412, 338.
$965, Mr. Speaker, and 412.
965, 412, 338. Okay? Senator Snogestein, you look quizzical. Do you have any other questions on those numbers? Section 3, authorization to pay and prioritize the payment of tax refunds. Boilerplate, any objection? And just note that there'll be a technical amendment. We'll renumber the sections here, because I think it should read 4 or 5, but we'll renumber it. Okay? The authorization to pay and prioritize the payment of tax refunds. No objection. Revenue collections in excess of quarterly collections. And this is again boilerplate requiring BBMR to give us the reports. Section 5, additional tax, child tax credit reimbursements. None. Section 6, debt service continuing appropriations. These are all received from GIDA, their bond statements, their bond report, I mean. Anyone have any questions on those? On page 7, anybody have any questions about the bond repayment amounts? No. Colleagues, I hate to do this. We'll go back to page 6. The 2 million increase in SAR was not included, so we're going to have to redo that special fund on line 5 on page 6. We'll read 268,515,139. And the total will change to 967,563,961. 967,563,961. On the bond payments on page 7, anybody have any questions on those? The bond payments on page 8. Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just a general question. I know that the University of Guam would be closing out on its final payment for their bond obligation of approximately $2 million. Does this budget provide for them to retain that amount? Or was that reallocated elsewhere?
That'll probably be in 2020. Yes, they have come to speak to me about that, but I have not received anything official.
Okay, so the final payment was not in fiscal year 18?
That we've been told,
okay.
No.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
But I know they want to do that because they have another project that they want to start up. Anything on page 8? If not, page 9. And please note that our total bond payments for the year is $88,262,056. Okay? Chapter 2, page 10, Department of Education. Any senator wish to be heard on page 10? Any numbers that they want clarified by OFB or by the Oversight Chair? Yes, Senator Uggan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if you can just share with members of the body what is the variance between what they're actually receiving fiscal year 18 versus what the total appropriated amount is in fiscal year 19. Are you aware of that variance? If you can share that information.
What was the question again?
What is the variance between what the Guam Department of Education would receive in fiscal year 18, inclusive of the fiscal realignment provision, versus the fiscal year 19 allocation?
DOE was 245 and 18.
No, it's not. 45?
After the FRP, they went down to 232. And in the budget, it's 229.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I wanted to highlight that, Mr. Speaker, because I believe the Board of Education had adopted a resolution or communicated with members of this body with regards to supporting the provision within Bill number 323. And in light of a slight downward reduction from fiscal year 18's actual anticipated cash budget. So I just wanted to highlight that in fact members of the board as well as the superintendent has communicated in writing that they are in support of the initial figure incorporated into Bill 323.
I want everybody to be clear, there was an amendment that was made with the SAR that, but it still came up to the same bottom line number. The 229 is still the total appropriation for the department. Just so that everybody is clear, the amendment that passed in the packet, the general fund should read 201,058,484. The Healthy Futures Fund number would stay the same. The limited gaming number would stay the same. The library resource number remains the same. The school lunch number remains the same. The TEF would, however, read, since we didn't pass the real property tax in its entirety, would read 13,797,608. Again, for everybody, that change number on line 3 is 13,797,608 for a grand total of 229,754,995.
Mr. Speaker?
Yes.
You identified line 3 on page 11 as 13,797,608, correct?
Correct.
And then you're saying the total on line 4 is still the same as what's written?
Yes, because the general fund amount was increased.
Okay, can you repeat what was then on line 25?
Yeah, the general fund number is going to read 201,058,484. This is part of that packet that moved things around?
Another packet went wrong?
Okay. So are we fine with the number at 229? And I thank Senator Ogden for reminding us that the board supported the 229 by resolution. Okay. Section 2, Guam Academy Charter School. I have before me an amendment. proffered by Senator Estevez. Everybody have a copy of it?
Mr. Chairman, there's an updated amendment going around, but I can go ahead and move with the explanation. It's just an update with a change in the figure.
The Estevez amendment is to increase the census, the cap of enrollment on line 12.
Mr. Chairman, if we can wait for the updated amendment to be passed around, but if I can speak on it, I can explain it for
This is not the one?
There was, this was the previous one. I just given for the updated one,
okay.
which.
I'm sorry.
It's the same amendment with just an adjustment to the figure, Mr. Chairman. And if I can speak to it.
Okay. Does everybody have this new amendment? It changes the census numbers, increasing the student enrollment at GACS to 740.
Mr. Chairman, to clarify, that's for iLearn Academy.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. All right, go ahead. You can explain your own amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The motion on the floor is to up the enrollment cap from 500 students to 740 students, which is both consistent with the approval by the council on charter schools, but more importantly, Mr. Chairman, it's consistent with the charter itself. As I know, the iLearn Academy has been consistent with all the tenets of their approved charter. Now, part of that charter shows growth over a period of time, and based on their growth projection on where they should be at a cap of 740 students. Now, I understand the arguments about the fiscal realities and the difficulties in moving and managing money with regards to public school students that attend these charter schools. But I think it's very important that we start establishing, Mr. Chairman, that this body approved the charter school program, and we gave the authority for these charters to be approved. And so I think it's important that if a charter school is meeting all of their marks, meeting all of their benchmarks, that we allow them to stay consistent. We have to set them up for success. And so if their charter says that they would be authorized 740 students for this year of their active charter, and thus it was approved by the council, I move that we adopt so that they would be able to, we would lift the cap or raise the cap from 500 to 740 to be consistent with both those numbers and documents.
The substituted bill, the bill as substituted by the committee included GACS. I'm trying to find on yours.
If you go, Mr. Chairman, if you look, let's see, line 13, it changes from 500 students for the iLearn Academy to 740.
Correct. And where is the amount that you're leaving for GACS?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not making a movement for GACS. I'm only making the movement for iLearn Academy. That's the data I have before me based on their charter. I don't have the data for the Guam Academy Charter School to be able to debate or argue what their numbers should be for this current fiscal year. So that's why I'm making the motion for iLearn Academy specifically. Because
yes, in the substituted bill, there is a number for Guam, for GACS, and you're not touching that.
I'm not touching that because I don't have the information to back up such a proposal.
So your amendment is just simply amending the line Just the set enrollment for iLearn.
Correct.
Without all the rest of this. Because this is really confusing because it doesn't have GACs in it. And the way that it looks is that you've completely excluded them.
My apologies, I believe. And so we can redo the amendment just to reflect that specific line, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, and so why don't we just simplify it without looking at this whole list? Just
So the change we're looking to do.
Just your amendment is just going to be to go to iLearn at the 500 to go to 740.
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
Is that clear? All right. Senator Esteves' amendment is on line 12 to change the number from 500 to 740 for iLearn Academy Charter School, comma, and then 740 for GACs and 350 for CFA. Send the chair and then you.
Mr. Speaker, I spoke to the chairwoman of the Charter School Council, and we discussed this before we even had this budget session, and iLearn was requesting for 620. They weren't asking for 740. They're asking even as much as 650, but 620 is really what they're asking for. I even spoke to former Senator Francis Santos, and he said 620 is what they were looking for. So, whatever any of my colleagues want to say, it came from the chairwoman, it came from the individual that's supporting and running the iLearn. Now, at the same token, when we go back to what the Department of Education supported, the 229 million, it didn't include the charter schools. And all the funding that comes for charter school comes from DOE. So I'm just curious to know, where is the money going to come from when we increase the population? I support iLearn. iLearn has been doing a great job. All of them are doing a great job. But we need to be able to identify the funding source. Okay? That's my concern. And only 620, I'd be objecting to the 740.
The 5 years that the charter schools have been funded has been through GDOE.
Correct.
So that is the funding source. Within the 229, it's always been inclusive of the charter schools. These are public school students.
Understood. But out of the 229, it didn't include the additional 120 or the additional 240.
No.
I'm just concerned about the funding source.
Okay. I'm just saying that's all that was set aside for GDOE, and within GDOE, these 1,600 or 1,700 students are going to have to be provided for at $6,058 a student.
Okay.
So, Senator Nelson, then Senator Castro, but I just want the original mover to understand that the chairman is saying that the number should be a different number than you're proposing. But we'll deal with you later. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is the change now in cost for the 6,088 if we are moving it up to the request of 700 or 640? What is the cost?
What was your question again?
What is the cost the change in cost per student now? What is the sum of 700 students for this specific school as opposed to 500 students?
Last year in the budget, we provided $6,500 per student. Since GDOE was getting a reduction from the previous year, we also reduced the charter school allocation per student.
And so how much does a GDOE student receive per student?
That's really difficult to calculate, though the $6,500 was received in testimony by the CFO of GDOE a few years ago. That's the reason why it was allotted to the charter schools. It was not something that I dreamt up. It was a number that was testified to by the CFO, going on about the fact that they were we very proudly ran GDOE with $6,500 a student. So I said, well, if that's the amount, then that's the amount that's going to go to the public school students that are in charter schools. You still have the floor. You have another question?
No, Mr. Speaker, I just have a little, perhaps an issue. I've taught at DOE. I see the struggles that the teachers and the staff have to go to provide for the students, for the money out of their own pockets, and now they have to, now we're adding, including an additional 200 students for iLearn Academy for I don't know what reason. I mean, it's even 60 students more than what the chair just said that the chairman of iLearn Academy requested. So I don't know any reason or logic behind this, but the more we give to the charter schools, the less the students at DOE receive, the less the teachers at DOE receive, and I think we just need to come to a consensus on where are we really helping DOE. That's all, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Castro.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support the amendment proffered by Senator Estevez, and I want to proffer the following reasons in hopes that I can convince my colleagues to support the amendment. First of all, as the previous speaker noted, the request at 740 is inherent in the original charter submitted as far back as 2014. The mover of the amendment was also accurate in stating, actually the chairman of the Committee on Education, in stating that the council did approve the increase, although not at 740, but at 620. Notwithstanding either of those two facts, I still stand with Senator Estevez in supporting the amendment because iLearn Academy has submitted substantial evidence to demonstrate that the school has been consistent in the academic gains of its students. In addition to that, based on the clean audits of a private firm, and as further supported by the public auditor, the school has demonstrated its ability to operate efficiently and effectively. I think third, and probably most important for me, Mr. Speaker, is that inherent in a charter school system is the ability to remain flexible. And given the trying times and our fiscal state of affairs of the government of Guam, to include DOE, the ability of a charter system to adjust salaries or negotiate or renegotiate contractual obligations, to adjust its staffing pattern, to engage in public-private partnerships, all lends itself, I guess, to the movers' amendment to increase the number of students for that specific school. I don't necessarily look at it as taking away from the Department of Education. I look at it as the department having historically 250 to 350 vacancies every summer. I think this provides an excellent tool for the department to alleviate some of the pressure. That would be my reasons in support of Senator Estevez's increase of iLearn's enrollment from 500 to 740. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman.
Any other senator wish to be heard on the Estevez amendment? Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess I'm trying to find out if DOE sent a resolution approving $229 million, and we are going to, by Section 2, take $10.4 million out of that $229 million. What is the effect of that on DOE? what are they going to cut if their budget's reduced by 10 million from what they're expecting?
I do not know what they will cut. These are the public, I don't know. Any other senator? Vice Speaker, anything else on the amendment? The amendment is simply one, to increase the number from 500 to 740.
Does the law, Mr. Speaker, currently allow for the council that there is no cap? Or does the law set caps on charter schools in general?
The law does have caps as part of the charter, and they know that they can't go above it but for what we appropriate. Last year, GACs attempted to increase their enrollment on their own. We only appropriated them 740, and so they've had to live the full year with 740 times 6,500, end of sentence. So it's our decision here how many students we allow as a cap. And now the Attorney General has opined and told the legislature that the council is within its authority to renew for 5 years the GAC's charter in spite of the fact that they had not complied with the law requiring accreditation. That was the reason why the original 323 did not include them, but the substituted version reinserted them because the opinion of the Attorney General instructed us to. Any further questions?
Thank you, Mr. No, I'm just still concerned. We're not, about what this 10.4 million reduction in DOE's appropriation is going to look like in the classrooms. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And just so that everybody's clear, and at some point, those of you that are going to be in the next legislature are going to have to make that hard decision. GDOE has presented to all of you, I believe, a proposal to separate the funding or to include the charter schools within GDOE. So that's a decision that's going to have to be made in a completely separate piece of legislation, not within the budget. You're going to have to amend the charter school law to either make it clear of what they can and cannot do, or make it clear that they should be under GDOE board, one or the other. That was not introduced this year, nor was it heard. So the committee was only able to address what we had, and we thought we could, with the Attorney General opinion, we've been told put GACs back in at 740, and the 500 for iLearn, which is now being proposed to be increased by 240, and that's the amendment. So, Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I just have a question with regards to what the funding requirement would be or is in this fiscal year, and then what the funding requirement would be should this amendment be adopted.
The funding requirement for the charter schools or for GDOE?
Yes, for the charter schools. For the charter schools, in terms of looking at the recommended formula, right now the suggestion is to reduce the allocation from $6,500 per student enrolled in a charter school to $6,088. but then there's a corresponding amendment in an allowance of the number of students in one of the charter schools from 500 to 740. So
those are two different things. One is the per student that we're going to reimburse them for. The other is the census increase, the enrollment
understood,
cap.
but if each of the charter schools were to cap, to max out their student allowance, what would be the financial requirement of this section? Okay, Mr. Speaker.
As I understand it, GACs, under their 5-year plan, should have been up at 1,200. But it's now still at 740.
But what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, is based on this formula and based on the proposed amendment, we are obligating the Department of Education to remit this amount to the charter schools. And I recognize the benefit of the charter schools and how they are educating our children. So I recognize the academic and the civic attainment and the successes of a few of the charter schools that are existing today. But the reason why I asked that, Mr. Speaker, and I just did some very rough calculations, that in this fiscal year, based on the existing formula, the allocation, presuming that all of the 3 charter schools cap the number of students that they have based on the allowances by the law, then in this fiscal year, they would have required $10,190,800. Now, with the modification of the formula as proposed in the amendment, that figure now would go up to $11,141,040. So it's an adjustment upward for our charter schools, and we just discussed the overall figure for the Guam Department of Education was slightly reduced. So it's a concern that I want to share with you, Mr. Speaker, because if it's 740, from 500 to 740, if that number, if they have not enrolled the students yet, if that number could be recognized and reduced, let's say to 650 for the upcoming fiscal year, and ensure that the additional resources are not extracted from Guam Department of Education, then certainly that's a consideration on the part of the body. But I have to caveat my statement again. Yes, I recognize some of the benefits of a couple of our charter schools that are in existence today and how they support and educate our children. But in the same token, when I'm looking at a variance of $950,240 above and beyond this fiscal year's allocation or allowances, then it's somewhat of a concern that I have.
And yes, there is an amendment by Senator Esteves to increase it to 740. You heard from the Oversight Chair that in his discussion with the Council Chair, they thought that the number should go to 620. You also heard from the Oversight Chair that speaking to one of the board members of iLearn, they wanted 620. How each one of you votes is your vote. But just know that the amendment is 740, and vote accordingly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for reminding me about that. Then in this case, I'd like to move to amend the good senator's amendment, adjusting the figure for iLearn from 500 to 740 rather than 740, to go with the figure that the education chair, in consultation with a member of the iLearn board, I believe you said he's the chairman, in consultation with the chairman, they recommended 620, so I'd like to recommend that that particular figure be used rather than the 740.
All right, on the Uggan amendment to amend the original Esteves amendment to 620, anyone wish to speak and be heard? Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, if my colleagues want, I have a copy of the letter from the Charter School Council in my hand. I had it printed. And I'll provide everybody that's what the council recommended, was the 620. And if you wanted to say that others should have it, there's also an increase for the other schools. but that's the only one they're pursuing is to iLearn. Okay, so I have it available. If my colleagues want, I can provide you a copy.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to concede to the chairman on education based on his conversation. I had a conversation, my own conversation, with the chair of iLearn, who said they wanted it at 740. But considering and the contesting of that information by the oversight chair, I withdraw the amendment in its entirety.
So withdrawing the amendment, there's no amendment left with, no amendment, no increase. Up.
And let me, if I can
That's
just
fine.
close on that motion,
Withdrawn
Mr.
it.
Chairman.
Is there any objection to him withdrawing his motion?
If they're going to be providing different information to this body, there's no reason to entertain
It's
it.
been withdrawn. All right, anything else on section 2? Section 3 on page 11, the Simon Sanchez procurement. Vice Speaker?
This is, wait. This is in addition to the 1 million that's also being appropriated in the back?
The committee in its substitute included this before we were made aware that there was a possibility that we could get tax amnesty money. So it's, yes, it is.
Can we change, I'd make a motion to change the word shall to may. Hopefully, if they don't need it, they're going to be able to use it for their operations, especially after 10 million is being taken out for charter schools. Especially if they're able to use the 1 million wisely in 2018. Thank you, Mr.
Senator Agnew?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on the motion to amend that particular word from may, shall to may, I object. I think that one of the figures that was provided by the superintendent during the course of the public hearing was that it's going to cost anywhere from $45 million to be able to acquire an A&E or complete an A&E, inclusive of acquiring an AOE. So, which is, for the information of the public, it's architecture and engineering design and the owner's agent engineer. Those are services that are prerequisites based on previous discussions with regards to the construction, or at least the initial work of rebuilding a Simon Sanchez High School. So if we're looking at this $1 million being set aside, plus the 1.5, then at least we're getting closer to that number that the superintendent recommended. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On the Vice Speaker's amendment to change the word shall to may, any other senator wish to be heard? And that's on line 25. Any senator wish to be heard on the Vice Speaker's amendment to change the word shall to may? Vice Speaker, do you have anything else to add?
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to add that it would leave it up to the discretion of the superintendent and his team. And I think it just hopefully gives them incentive to save on the A&E and use it for their operations of DOE. And this will in no way delay the A&E, Mr. Speaker, because it gives total discretion to the superintendent. Thank you.
Thank you. There's been an objection to the amendment to change the word shall to may. All those in favor of the Vice Speaker's amendment to change the word shall to may, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion fails. Section 4, Chamorro Studies Division. Vice
Mr.
Speaker.
Speaker, does this section, is it the same as last year? The wording? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any other questions on Chamorro Studies Division? Limited Gaming Fund. Anyone wish to, any comments or any questions on this limited gaming fund to GDOE? Vice Speaker?
Just want to make sure, Mr. Speaker, it says that this sum shall be allocated from the limited gaming fund appropriation, but nothing, not for anything in particular. The limited gaming fund already takes place in section 1? Is that, are we missing something there?
No, that's a special fund line that says limited gaming fund.
Yes.
And of that amount, we're appropriating
In
529,000.
In section 1, you're appropriating 524,000, and then in section 5, we're allocating from section 1 appropriation 529,
Is there a typo?
but it doesn't say what we're allocating it for.
I see your point that there's a there's a number. Thank you very much, Madam Vice Speaker. It should read 524, the same as the bottom line on page 10.
And is it just for fiscal year 19? Or is it for something particular? Is it for sports?
It's used for paying for coaches' fees and different things at DOE.
I'm just asking if we're supposed to include that here, because you've already got the appropriation, so it's going to DOE, now we're allocating it. Normally you say what you're allocating it for. Just want to make sure with OFB if this is consistent.
Mr. Speaker?
Yes.
The limited gaming is not for the coaches and fees, that's under section 6.
Oh.
Identify the coaches, healthy future funds, separate.
Anybody want to make any amendments?
I think it's supposed to, can you just tell us what it was in FY18? Is this the identical language?
Is it the same as 18's?
The section pursuant to section 5204D3, Chapter 5, Title 11 is specific to the Guam Department of Education and their uses as cited in the code. So I think sub D3 is specific to DOE. And then I guess D1 and 2 might be specific to parks.
Okay, so you're trying to say use it for the purposes listed in this section. Okay, thank you. Those are sports facilities? Pardon?
And supplies, whatever is in the statute.
Thank you very much.
Point of information, Mr. Speaker, if I may, just to respond to the good senator's inquiry.
Please.
It does provide here up to 1/3 of the available balance to the Department of Education for the repair and construction of its sports facilities and for the procurement of sports equipment and supplies. So that's the 1/3 allocation to the Guam DOE.
Does that clarify it for you? Section 6. Section 6A, anybody? 6A. 6B. Oh, I'm sorry. MIS has requested that we break Let's break for a second.
Are we recessing until tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, or what? No. Or what, breaking?
Nine o'clock tomorrow morning, then, please. We tried 10, and we didn't start until almost 11. 9, let's see if we can make it.
Thank you.